Awesome. Well, let's get started, guys.
Right.
Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Throughout the event here and the webinar, be sure to add your questions. We'll have you add your questions to the Q&A section. So at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a Q&A section. Go ahead and add the questions there. It'll help us track those a little better. Throughout the presentation, Jennifer will definitely take some questions, and then at the end, we'll have a bit of time to cover anything that you might want to ask before you head out. So great to have you here. We're really looking forward to talking about this. If all of you who are here could just put in the chat, what is your role at your company? What are you doing, and why was this appealing for you? Just let us know what we can do, because we want to make sure we cover the material in a way that's going to be super valuable for you. So if we know what your role is, we can maybe customize some of the examples and be really specific for you. So Jennifer, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, take it away.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to see everybody here. This is our second one of these webinars, and the last one, I knew we had some folks that really wanted a recording, and technology didn't, the technology gods didn't work with us too well last time, so we're going to hopefully do a better job of that this time. So, Teresa, I should just probably ask you to make sure we're recording, if you don't mind.
Yep.
All right, so I want to start out by sharing a little bit about leadership in our company. And I share this with a bit of a preface. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about me too. But I don't share all the stuff about us to sell us as much as I do to share, although that would be nice. But as much as I share to kind of give you a sense of the perspective that we have. And I think maybe if you understand a little bit about where we're coming from and what we've seen out in the field, that really informs this discussion. So I just want to make sure that kind of people know what we do, so you have a sense of why we have the information we have and where we get it and kind of what we see. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions at all that you can think of as well that help. So Leadership Insights is an organization. We work with leaders and organizations going through disruption to improve their capacity to adapt. And so most of the people that we see is in the context of either senior level executive coaching, leadership workshops, or consulting projects. We do a lot of restructuring. I do a lot of strat planning, things like that. So I think one of the things that maybe differentiates us a bit is that we think of ourselves as good coaches because of the time that we spend in the field, kind of sleeves rolled up, working with leaders. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But what I started to realize is that there are patterns, and those are the things that I think people can learn from, that, whether you're new in a leadership role or you're about to take on a leadership role, I think there's some patterns that people can learn from that really can help assimilate, avoid some common mistakes, and then really demonstrate visible leadership faster in a new role if there's just a few things you can intentionally think about. So before I go there, I'll tell you a little bit about me. I've been working with corporate leadership teams in over half the 50 states and 11 countries over the last 25 now years. Wow, we had a year turn somewhere between now and the last one of these that we did. So the point is, I've seen a lot of disruption and a lot of different approaches to managing it. And one thing is really clear right now: these are strange times. And so assimilating into a new role right now is difficult, but it's not impossible. And we have a lot of folks that are doing it. And so as a firm, we've seen some things go well, and we've seen some things maybe not go so well. And so I'd like to share some of what we've learned in the process. So you can kind of read the slide about me. I won't talk about a lot of my experience, but that's kind of where I come from. And as it relates to leadership, the time that we spend in the field, I want to just share maybe what we spend some time on. You can see some of our clients on the page, but we spend a lot of time creating alignment. So we think about alignment as structure, people, investments, processes, whatever it takes to drive strategy, and try to get people on the same page. So we spend an awful lot of time with leadership teams creating shared agendas. And then the other half of our business is really around developing what we call adaptive leaders. So these are leaders that are equipped to deal with the adaptations and changes that are required given the flux and the constant state of disruption that this environment is. So adaptive leadership and adaptation, as we think of it, isn't just being flexible and agile and being able to change and shift. It really is reinforcing this notion of adaptive leadership that comes out of Harvard from the Kennedy School. The guru there is a guy by the name of Ron Heifetz. And the idea is really that there are two kinds of challenges that go on. And one is sort of these technical challenges where, we need to do things better, faster, cheaper, but basically we know how to solve the problem. We know what the problem is. We know how to solve it. We just have to kind of put some effort behind it. Those are sort of maybe I'll say old school challenges, although some of them are still out there. But this notion of adaptive challenges is really things that are more complex, challenges where we've never seen anything like it before. And the way we've always done it, just on steroids or better, faster, cheaper, isn't going to solve the problem. And I think that's the kind of situation that we're in right now as we think about assimilating executives into new roles in an environment which by and large is virtual. We have to replace that informal water cooler talk with something just to help people build relationships and really get in to a new organization. So the adaptive leadership side really is a lot of executive coaching and a lot of leadership workshops. And what we really try to do is apply a lot of the tools and the things that we see to individual cases that people are dealing with. So even in our workshops, we don't do HBR cases or whatever. We're really rolling up our sleeves and dealing with what our clients need to solve. So the interesting thing when we think about onboarding and when you come into a new organization as an executive is that what the data tells us, and we know this from experience, but it's always helpful to have data, is that rigorous onboarding programs that are really focused around the person and the culture can reduce the time to productivity significantly. But the challenge is that the majority of the Fortune 500 really fail to deliver on any kind of comprehensive onboarding that's targeted towards a cultural and a real leadership assimilation. So, one could argue, yeah, but the Fortune 500, they're always going to be there and they seem to do okay, so maybe we don't really need all that. And we hear that a lot. But I would say we have to look at the cost of executive level turnover. So when I think about, C-level turnover, executive turnover, what's the so what in terms of why we even should have a rigorous onboarding process? And what the research tells us is that, and I looked up a bunch of statistics, so I probably got more than we need, but employee turnover in the US alone is costing companies anywhere between 12 and 40% of what we call pre-tax income. So as a business community here, the annual cost is about $25 billion. And that turnover in these senior level roles is costing shareholders almost 38% of additional value. And that's by a company called C-Suite Analytics that analyzes all this stuff. But there are many others. There's another company, Employee Benefit News, reported in 2017 that turnover can cost employers 33% of an employee's annual salary. So, you just add that up, and there really is huge benefit to making sure that leaders get it right the first time. And so, even SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, found that companies typically spend 6 to 9 months of an employee's salary to hire and train their replacement. So the stakes are pretty high here, and I think they're a lot higher than we typically acknowledge. So what we've found is that there really are 4 themes that I'm going to group them into themes. I think there's 4 things that when we watch new executives coming into an organization, there are 4 mistakes that we see that, frankly, I think can pretty easily be averted. So there's a couple ways to avert them, but we'll come back to that. But let's talk about the mistakes. So the first is they don't ask for help, right? So when I think about not asking for help, there's many reasons for that, right? But when you come into a new executive role, I get it, right? It feels like you're the rock star, right? You're the one being brought in to be the expert. but at the end of the day, you might be an expert in what you're doing, but you're not an expert in onboarding, right? So the problem is that we feel like we walk in as the expert, and sometimes we hesitate to really ask for help. But there are people like assimilation coaches that we'll talk more about who can really make your onboarding process a whole lot easier and help you through that. The second mistake here is that they turn these assimilation meet and greets into chat sessions, right? So I'd love to, you know, I wish I could see your faces, because that's part of webinars that I don't like. But like, how many people have, when you join a company, you get this list, right? And it's usually several pages long of all the people you need to go meet with. And it's hard. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the titles are on there, right? But it's really hard to get those scheduled. And then, you know, you spend the first 2 or 3 weeks kind of running around, you know, meeting with all these people. But the challenge here is that if we use those to just, there's a huge tendency to just say, okay, well, let me go meet these people and get to know them, and we'll talk about our kids and where we're from, and, you know, what was your career like, and all of that. And that's all important, and maybe even more so because we're missing some of that informal interaction. But if you don't, or I should say the new executive doesn't, some of you are in HR too, if you're using those for chat sessions and not really driving an agenda in those meetings, you are missing a huge opportunity to really demonstrate what I call visible leadership quickly. And what visible leadership looks like is that instead of, you know, you got to spend your 5-10 minutes, you know, talking about your background and all of that. But at some point in that meeting, you take control of the meeting and you say, hey, there are 5 things I really wanted to make sure I got from you today. My relationship with you is going to be critically important. And here are some things that I want to make sure we cover. You send that message about 10 minutes into an assimilation meeting, you have turned the table, built credibility, and really demonstrated some visible leadership. So the idea here, though, is that takes some intentional preparation. Now, what we do in our assimilation coaching practice is we have a lot of those questions kind of pre-written based on, you know, titles and whether they're a direct report or a senior leader or a peer or whatever. There's obviously some patterns and some things that that you can pull from. But the idea is that you have thought through those questions in advance, and you've got 3 or 4 things you want to get out of each person you go meet with, where you can really drive and own that conversation. The third major mistake is often they don't earn the credibility to critique and correct problems that they find. And so it seems like I saw this a lot last year. We had a couple of folks that I worked with that were coming into organizations, knew where there was a mess. So coming in to really create a turnaround, you know, knew coming in that they needed to either turn people, change processes, fix things that were broken. One was a CFO. He, you know, tremendous controls issues that need to be fixed. But here's the thing, is that anywhere that you go, and some companies admittedly are much stronger wedded to this than others, but anywhere you go, the situation got there because it did, right? I mean, that's a phrase that I use a lot. But what it basically is saying is that there's some kind of legacy, there's some history that led up to the messed up situation that you walked into. And so there's a big difference between coming in and really trying to make changes immediately and going and meeting with everyone on the team, really listening to why things are the way they are, listening to how they got that way, understanding the culture, and then starting to have that conversation. So it can absolutely have the same outcome, but this notion of really building credibility and understanding the history and the legacy before you start to correct problems, it's almost going slow to go fast. So if you do that, it'll allow you to, once you have that credibility, there's not going to be this resistance, and people will engage with you instead of against you. And I've seen that go sideways a couple times this year. I've also seen it go really well. In fact, one of the people who it went well for is on this call. So Kelly, thanks for joining us. But I will say when that goes well, it really is, it gives you the ability to demonstrate exponentially more value right off the bat. And then the fourth mistake that we see is that they don't enroll people in their vision. So, the idea here is that when you come into a new organization, oftentimes we see people that are starting a new organization. So we had, this year we had a guy starting an innovation group for a major airline. We had another couple of folks that were building COEs. And the thing is, when you're coming in, you're the rock star, you know how to do it, they hired you for a reason, you've got all this great expertise. But if you go in there as the expert out of the gate and just, again, it's the same concept, right? Just trying to make changes without really enrolling people in the why, it is really hard. And what you find in that instance is that you're almost pushing a rope uphill 2-3 months down the path. So as you think about starting a new role and you think about really planning out that first 100-day plan, which I would advise anyone to do, a lot of that is going to be, how do you really engage and enroll people in a shared vision so that it's not just your vision, it's a collective shared vision that everyone can support and really own a part of. And this is another one where I've seen some failures and I've seen some great examples of this, and I've certainly seen a couple of failures as well. But I think the part that we miss the most is we don't explain the stakes for why we have a different vision or why we need to do things differently. And when in combination with, maybe it's the not really understanding the legacy and then coming in without helping people through the stakes of what's going to happen if they don't do it, or the upside if they do, it's a very lonely place to be building something new without folks engaged and enrolled. So these are 4 things that we see happen over and over and again. And I want to talk a little bit about why they happen and then some antidotes to potentially prevent some of those from happening. So, and Teresa's monitoring the chat as we go through this. So if you've got anything that you'd like to add, feel free to, put it in there and we'll do our best to answer it as well. So when I think about, why don't people do these things? Why don't they ask for help? And I think asking for help is one of the biggest challenges that we see. And, again, I think it comes down to new leaders feel like they need to have all the answers. They need to know everything. And this one is just super dangerous because you can't be an expert in everything. And even if you are an expert in, finance or marketing or innovation or whatever your part of the world is, you're probably not an expert in onboarding yourself. Like, I'm a great mediator, but I can't mediate my family, right? I can't mediate myself through a problem. I would probably hire someone to do that. So there's times when even rock stars have roadies and groupies and, people to producers that produce the show and carry the gear and all that good stuff. And so, I think the producer analogy is a great one. So it does take a bit of humility to say, I'm an expert, but I'm not the expert in this. But here's the thing. It's always hard when I think about asking for outside help when you first join an organization. That can feel really awkward. But here's the thing. It's not about someone finding out what you're not. It's about them finding out who you are right away. And who you are is somebody that says, this role is so important to me that I want to get it right the first time. And I am so committed to this process of coming in and assimilating to this organization. I know I've got one chance to get it right and it matters. So I might ask for some help. So as you think about, coming into a new organization, one of the things we strongly suggest is asking for help. It can certainly be from internal HR. What we find is oftentimes that's not enough. So an assimilation coach is something that is actually something that we've done a ton of this year in the last couple of years, and it's certainly something that we recommend for roles that are really important where you need to demonstrate visible leadership fast. Another reason maybe we don't ask for help is this, I think I just hit it, this fear of asking for the investment, right? It's just a tough, kind of an awkward move. They're paying you a lot of money. You probably maybe just got a signing bonus. They just reload you, whatever, or maybe not in COVID. but, and I think COVID we can blame COVID for everything, right? That's a free excuse now. But I think this notion of having to assimilate virtually just cements the importance of getting some extra help, because there's so many conversations that you're going to have to think through in a different way as you walk into an organization. And then I had to stick my rock star one in there, but I think we've already probably talked about that. So we'll talk a little bit about, what is an assimilation coach? Many people haven't even heard of that. It's something that, I feel like our assimilation business, I've been doing this my whole career, but it's not something we ever really marketed or said, oh, that's worth putting on the website. But it was always something that, we did a couple of these a year, or, even when I was internal HR, these were a big deal. But they weren't as big a deal, I think, as they are now, because people are starting to see the value. So really what an assimilation coach is an executive external advisor and sort of thought partner. So they are somebody that can be objective and really help you think through and strategize as to how to make your first 100 days or your first 90 days or your first 6 months, whatever it is, as effective as you possibly can. So as you walk into a new role, we often hear this notion of people feel like they're drinking from the fire hose, like, oh, there's all this information we're trying to take in. An assimilation coach kind of helps you adjust while you're drinking from the fire hose. So it helps you kind of make sense of all of the things that are coming at you in an orderly way that allows you to kind of strategize and build that plan. They're also an advocate for you throughout the onboarding. So one of the things that I like to do as I think about, how to really add value, I like to start before the client starts, right? So if I can get into the organization maybe 15 to 20 days before my client even starts their role, I can get in there. I can understand what the expectations are. I can meet with some of the stakeholders, some of the people that interviewed them. I can really understand a little bit about the culture. And I can also start to put my finger on, well, gosh, there's maybe there's 7 stakeholders and 6 of them have a different vision for what this person's role actually is, or they all have, very different points of view on what this person needs to do first or second, or, that sort of thing. So it allows me to kind of help sort through that. And I can highlight some things that are really critical the minute a new executive comes in the door. So when I think about, what's going on when a client says, hey, I need some help, right? Especially with assimilation, oftentimes it's helping them understand the politics in an organization. So we work for a major airline this year who has a very, very distinctive culture. So I can't necessarily share the name of client, but I will say they political system there was complex and quite difficult to navigate coming in, new, particularly as a diversity hire in a couple of cases. And so one of the things we worked with was, how do you really get in there and get to understand the politics really without missing a beat and without, making a misstep. So I always like to ask stakeholders, what are some of the unwritten, rules or rules of engagement or political norms, sacred cows, things like that. The more of that I can learn ahead of time or even right after the executive starts, the more I can really help them intentionally avoid stepping in it, if you will. It could be really helping them build alliances around and rally support for what they're there to do without, being undermined. A lot of times it's about building and socializing a strategy for a new team or creating a shared vision. Sometimes it's assessing and building a team. So if you think about you're coming into a new organization, you've got to understand your role, your peers, your boss, your responsibilities, and then you've got this team to worry about at the same time, whether we like it or not. Teams require a bit of care and feeding. So we want to make sure that, you've got a way to really reassure them and get to know the team and then assess them and make changes that need to be made. So and build that team, figuring out a new org structure, if that's even necessary, that sort of thing. Those are things that we can help with right away. So, what I would say is this notion of drinking from the fire hose and coming in, I mean, it just doesn't have to be this hard. So let's talk for a minute about, what an assimilation coach can do in terms of just adding value. So when I think about, we talked a little bit about understanding and really probing stakeholders to understand and triangulate what's expected of you. Now, you can do this yourself, right? We don't have a monopoly on this. So if you don't want to hire a coach, that's totally fine. This is the same work that needs to happen, right? It's how do you get out there and really meet with the stakeholders, the folks that have a stake in your success, and really understand what's expected of you. And chances are they're going to have some differing points of view. So somehow you've got to very quickly ferret out the key messages that you need to send quickly, what each of those people needs to see in order to feel like you're being successful. That we talked about the hidden landmines and, what do you need to deliver in those first 90 days? And then, and so those are things that whether you have a coach or not, they're, check them off as a to-do list as a new leader. But certainly these are things where an objective point of view can certainly help. And then, the notion of organizing all this information that you're getting so that you can sort of demonstrate visible leadership. And we have tools for this. So, and I would recommend, whether you use our tools or your tools, I would recommend everybody create some kind of an assimilation spreadsheet to track what you're learning, who you're meeting with, who you need to meet with. You go meet with Joe. Joe says, hey, you ought to meet, Jim in a different department, or you ought to meet Joanne or whatever. You got to write that down somewhere. You're going to forget. So my suggestion is always to have, whether it's a notebook or a spreadsheet, different things work for different people. But what we've built is kind of an integrated toolkit so that when somebody comes in, they can keep track of what observations they're making, what hypotheses are they drawing based on, what they're hearing, what kind of conclusions are they coming up with that you might want to check and verify, what resources are available. Oftentimes we come in new and we're so, I've been a new executive too. So this is not, it's not easy to kind of just deal with all this information. And then, in the middle of it, you're like, wait a minute, who was I supposed to call for my benefits information? It's like, you've just got all this stuff hitting you. So keeping track of, who's my supply chain person, who's my communications person, whatever, all these resources, just put them all in one place, whether it's a notebook or a spreadsheet, that sort of thing, or you can certainly use a toolkit like the one we have. And then, really identifying culture and fit elements before you get derailed. So I think this is something that when I look at companies that don't have great onboarding, this is one of those areas where, they don't really, they don't give enough credence to the notion of culture and fit before, and those are things that can turn your world upside down if you get sideways, because once you get sideways, it's really hard to get back. And we can help with that too, but that's a much harder play. So I would always rather deal with it up front. So I would encourage you, if you're starting a role this year, to really think about the culture of the organization, where you're a fit, and be very honest with yourself around where you're not, because you're never going to fit everything. But if you understand the areas where you might not have a natural fit, you can figure out how to be yourself in a way that works for the organization. And so I think that's really important. And that's one of the things that a coach can also help you really think through is, and I've got just a great example of this with a client right now, is we've got somebody that he is known for asking a ton of questions, but he walked into an organization and he's asking all these questions and people feel like they're indicted. So how do you, and when you're senior executive at the C-level, asking a question sometimes can make people feel threatened. He doesn't mean it that way, but it's a classic example of where what your natural tendency is going to have to maybe be tweaked a bit for the organization. Doesn't mean he doesn't need the information. Doesn't mean he can't get the information, shouldn't ask the questions. We just have to figure out a way to do it in a way that works with the culture. So I see a question just came in. What if the organization is not entirely self-aware of their culture? And what assessments do you use to get everyone on the same page? Great question. So a couple of answers. So one, I would say that usually when we get engaged as an assimilation coach, we don't necessarily ask the organization about the culture. What we do is we ask the people about the culture, right? So if I go meet with, 10 stakeholders that touch a particular role, I can ask each one of those people to describe what are some of the political norms, what are some of the things you should really watch out for, what are the things you definitely need to do, what are the key messages that you need to send. I can triangulate that and get a pretty good sense of the culture that that person is walking into. Now, have I done a full-blown organization culture assessment? Absolutely not. We can do that. That's a totally separate thing. We use a tool called culture mapping for that. And actually, we've got a couple of tools for that. Culture mapping is one. The Hogan Values Assessment is another great one. And then I also have a culture partner that we work with. So there are a lot of ways to, if the goal is to get everyone on the same page, that's a very different project than helping a new leader assimilate. So what we would do with that new leader is help them assimilate to the specific situation that they're in. But if you want to get everyone in the organization on the same page with what the culture is, I think that's a totally different question. I would say another approach we've used for that, which takes us away from new leaders starting, but frankly, we've done this with a lot of new leaders as well, is to say, what are the organizational capabilities that that leader's organization needs to demonstrate? So in other words, if you're walking in to run, let's say, a retail organization, some of your, I don't mean individual competencies, but actual organizational capabilities, you've got to be able to buy product. You've got to be able to get it to the store. You've got to be able to put it on the shelf. You've got to be able to staff the store, sell the product, provide customer service. Those are organizational capabilities. So bring that down a couple of levels for a function. We want to help that new leader understand what are those capabilities that their team needs to deliver to the organization. Some might refer to those as services the team provides. And then we can figure out, all right, in order to deliver those capabilities, what is the culture that we need as an organization to drive those capabilities? So once we figure out capabilities, we do something called a capability model. We can prioritize investments around that. We can look at structure. We can look at culture. We can look at a lot of different things. Cultures is one that is really critical, though. And Diana, I don't know if I answered your question in its entirety. So if I didn't, oh, I did. Okay, good. I got a yes, thank you. All right, I guess you guys can see that. Or no, maybe I can, and I guess Teresa and I can see that. All right.
And Jennifer, Barry has a question too that I think is really appropriate for this particular slide where you're at in the presentation. He said, Jennifer, I have a COO starting on Tuesday, okay, and I have a 3-page list of meet and greets. What are other approaches to make this more effective?
Great question. What I would do in that case is I would probably group that list by direct reports, peers, let me think, COO. So direct reports, peers, maybe senior leaders and external. I'm assuming they're going to have some board interaction. I would group that list by kind of, the type of person or the level they're at. And then I would maybe, I would put it in a spreadsheet and I would literally provide like 3 to 5 things that they should find out from each of those people. So if they're going to go meet with their direct reports, some of those questions are going to duplicate. You might say, I want to understand, your career history. I want to understand what do you want to do in the next 2 to 3 years? What's your role today? Things like that. There's probably more questions. I could probably come up with 10 for direct reports, but you got to start somewhere. So I would group that list and I would provide some more specific information on what they should get from that person. So, also in your organization, you have some key initiatives that a COO would be involved in. So let's say you are rolling out, a new system or a big new digital transformation or whatever your key initiatives are. Make sure that they know who to talk to about the specific initiatives that they're going to have to be involved in right away. I think that's super important on a list like that. So, there's some overlap maybe across direct reports, but there's also some specifics. You could say to them, oh, hey, this person runs the sales operation. You're probably going to need to want to ask them about these two things just to become aware of them. Or, this person runs our manufacturing plant. You want to make sure you understand, what's hot with a particular issue that's going on. So the degree to which you can provide them with some insight and some specifics on how to drive that conversation. The other thing is, Barry, it sounds like you're in HR. This doesn't all fall to you either, right? So you could sit down with the new COO and walk through this and say, okay, let's plan how you want to structure these meetings, because we don't want them to be chat sessions, and you can coach them to say, I want to make sure that you're able to walk in there and demonstrate visible leadership fast. What's your agenda? Let's talk about, the agenda for some of these meetings, and you can coach them into that as well. Because I think a lot of times people are just so like the fire hose again, right? They're not thinking about how do I organize all this information. So the more that you can coach them and help them through that, I think the better off it is. Okay. Any other questions while we pause for questions?
He said, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. Awesome. I can't see that on my end. Perfect. All right. So then I just wanted to share a little bit more, in terms of outcomes. I know this whole notion of a coach, sometimes, it's an investment you have to justify. So I wanted to throw out there, these are some things that, I talk a lot about demonstrating visible leadership fast. I think that is the absolute most important outcome that an assimilation coach can help you with. The notion that they're potentially can start before. Now I say start before the candidate starts. I love it when that happens, but the truth of the matter is it rarely does. I mean, companies just don't get their act together that quickly, but when we can add a whole lot more value. So, the other one is really a clearer understanding of expectations, more intentional integration into the culture and the politics. What this does, this is all about, and if you're in HR and you're coaching some of these new leaders coming in, the coaching is all about how do you get more intentional about this integration so that it's not just this sort of willy-nilly haphazard, hey, I'm here. We had a guy, one of my clients had a guy, and this is unreal. He was a head of sales and he started, and he was so enthusiastic. Like everybody loved this guy. He was so enthusiastic, big personality, nice guy. And he just came in and volunteered for absolutely everything. I mean, yeah, we'll take care of that. My team will do that. I got it. Every meeting he was in, he just took everything. Where do you think that landed? Yeah. So a year later, he wasn't there anymore because volunteering for everything wasn't really the best assimilation strategy, right? It's not possible. You're setting yourself up to fail. So what we want to try to do is really be strategic about what are the most critical things right away, and how can we manage all these, different expectations. So it's funny. I mean, one of our clients last year was like the head of innovation. I mentioned this one. It was interesting. I mean, he had a CEO that wanted to revolutionize their customer experience. So his whole focus was, let's become a lifestyle brand. And so he brought in this head of innovation to do that. But the head of operations said, yeah, we don't need to be a lifestyle brand. We just need to be able to run the operations. Like this lifestyle brand stuff, I don't get it. We don't want to be Apple. Like, we just need the basic blocking and tackling. And then the head of marketing basically said, well, it's all the messaging. I mean, nothing's really going to change. I just need them to work with me to really focus on changing the messaging, not the actual company. And then there was a head of customer service involved that said, well, we're going to build this whole innovation function around design thinking. And so, you can imagine being this poor guy walking in with 4 like vastly disparate expectations. So what we were able to do is really work with him to kind of ferret out what does his role need to be and how's he going to be successful in that environment, which frankly involved creating a lot of alignment between those various stakeholders. And so what his role immediately became was, how do I build my team? And how do I get all these 4 people that I, essentially are above me, how do I get them aligned? And we worked with him a lot on, one-on-one meetings, chipping away at it, really getting himself out of the middle and helping to ferret through a set of expectations that made sense. So the other thing I'll say is there are questions that an external person can ask that you can't as a new executive. So one question that I love to ask, and this is one, I'll give you one of my trade secrets here. You can certainly ask it yourself. But the question that I love to ask is this the kind of place where a new leader has to come in and demonstrate change right out of the gate? I mean, some places you got to come in, if you don't turn your whole team and do a restructuring and, put your stake in the ground in the first 30 days, they're questioning why they hired you. And then there are other places that they really want you to listen and get embedded and really get to meet people. And then, they want you to kind of like sit on it for a little while before you really come in and observe and then make change. So those are 2 ends of a long continuum. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where's this organization? So I kind of like to ask some of those questions that are really candid. If an executive comes in and asks that question, it can come across like they're trying to shirk work, right? It can look like I'm trying to get the cop out. But if a coach comes in and asks that question, hey, now I'm partnering with somebody, and then I can go translate that to help out somebody that's walking in. So a couple of other things, certainly some early warnings around misalignment. It's easy when you're new to get a little bit sideways. So we want to try to help people see that and intentionally reinforce that personal brand, but in a way that minimizes that misalignment right off the bat. The other thing, I don't do anything without an action plan. So the notion of really advancing specific business outcomes are important to me as a coach. And that's something that I think gets built into that 100-day plan so that people don't lose sight of that. Some other outcomes might be, really increasing value faster. We talked about the political systems. I think early communication and influence are critical. So a lot of times we'll work with somebody only on key messaging. I mean, that's a huge one. And then, there's this notion of integration of work and life commitments. And that sounds sometimes a little silly, but I can't tell you how many times it's come up in coaching where someone is just working nonstop, paddling like a duck crazy beneath the surface, trying to look calm on top. And at the end of the day, that's not sustainable. So one of the outcomes is working with a coach is, first of all, you can offload some of that. It helps minimize the stress, and it helps the coach can help prioritize, what's really critical. And then finally, reduce turnover and increase the cultural fit is huge. So I got one more slide, and then we'll come back for any more questions that you might have. I don't want to go through this in a ton of detail, but this is kind of what a 6-month plan would look like. So I share it from a coaching perspective. If you're in HR, if you're starting a new executive role, this is a great way to think about your first 6 months in a new organization. So if we think about, kind of T-15 is really that opportunity to kind of get HR. And if you're in HR, it's the opportunity to get, the executives and HR, everybody really aligned around what the role is, what was the criteria for selecting this person, what's important to us, do any assessments that you have. We do the Hogan on just about everybody. That's not universal. All these are customized, but that's an assessment we really, really like. And so we use that one a lot. And then, and I should just say the reason we use it a lot is because it really helps us get to know the executive as well as the aspects of their personality that may drive success or could potentially derail them. So that really helps us from a culture fit too. It also, the Hogan Values, I think it was Diane, somebody asked about culture a little while ago. That Hogan Values assessment really tells us a lot about the environment that an executive will create on their team. And so that either does or does not fit with the organization's culture. So we want to know, what aspects of that are likely to fit well and what we might need to intentionally tweak. So that tends to be a real good culture fit assessment too. So, and we've also used Myers-Briggs. We've also used the PRF. There we go. We've used that one, and we've used a couple of other things as well. But the from brain dominance, there's a couple things, but Hogan is probably my favorite. So full transparency on that one. And an interview. So if I was doing a regular senior executive coaching engagement, I would do some kind of executive 360, an interview-based 360. We replaced that in assimilation with the stakeholder feedback because that gives us a sense of how to help the person assimilate. And then we circle back with some feedback, 3-6 months in. So first 30 days, really about creating stakeholder alignment. 60 days, we start thinking about execution. Where can I really make a contribution? We also think a lot about, the learning plan, the resource plan, a new leader simulation by that point usually, which is a great thing to have an external person do as well. I've seen those botched unbelievably bad by people who shouldn't be doing them, but that's just a personal pet peeve of mine. 90 days, we really think about acceleration. You're in there, you're in the door by then, you have a good understanding of the role, what's going on. How do we really tweak, course correct, and then expand the network? And then, obviously out to 6 months is really about measuring and ensuring sustainability, evaluating results, and then figuring out where to go from here. So, all right, I feel like I need to take a breath. That was a whole lot. So I'm going to stick I'm just going to, as a plug, I got a book come out last summer, and it has nothing to do with simulation, but it has a whole lot to do with how we build resilience in this crazy environment that we're in. So if that's of interest at all, there's a discount code and the link to it on the slide. I'll put that up there. But in the meantime, any questions? What can I answer for you? What hasn't been answered? Anything you're curious about? No limits. We'll answer anything we can.
I do have a question. Let's see. How do I make the case to my superiors for investing in a coach? In other words, how do I ask? And I know, Jennifer, on our last webinar, you came up with some really great sound bites to just be able to present that well.
We'll see if I can do that again. Gosh, I think when I think about asking for a coach, it's a lot of, I think I shared a little while ago, this notion of my assimilation is critically important and I only get one shot at this. I want to get it right. And I really think I could benefit from some help of an external person to make sure that I can shorten the time to transition as fast as possible, and really get some help assimilating. This messaging is all about showing that you value your relationship with the organization so much that you're willing to ask. You're willing to make the ask, and you want the organization to make the investment because you need to get it right the first time, and that this is the most important thing that you're going to do probably in your career with this organization, and you'd like their support in getting that right the first time. The other, maybe obvious, I don't know if it's obvious, but the other justification, is that it just shortens the time to ramp up and gives you a chance to really demonstrate visible leadership fast and juggle a whole lot of competing priorities. I don't know too many, there are certainly organizations that won't make the investment and that'll say no, but I don't know too many places anymore that would lose respect for you if you came in with that approach.
And alternatively, we have and this is actually my question I'm asking, because we have a couple of people here who are in the HR role, who are in management roles, who are onboarding other people. Have you ever run into a situation, Jennifer, where the new candidate has been a little resistant to coaching, or comes in with their own ideas and wants to do it their way? Has that ever been an issue? And if so, how do you overcome that?
Well, coaching is one of those things where you can lead a horse to water, right? So I'll say this. It is a rare day, especially in the assimilation space. It is a rare day where someone truly doesn't want the resource of a coach. When people are being drugged to me because they've gone sideways and they need to fix it, yeah, we see that happen. And those are the ones I try to walk away from, quite frankly. But I think in the assimilation space, what I've seen more of is somebody has a really great sense of how to do something, but maybe not something else, right? So maybe they don't need help with politics, but they need help with messaging. Or they don't need help with messaging, but they need help managing expectations or something like that. And it becomes, where can I help? And I think that, maybe the most interesting of those, I did have one not long ago where this guy he was a phenomenal leader. And if there's anybody that probably didn't need a coach, it was this guy. And so there I was, but I would say the rhythm we got into, and to his credit, he never canceled a meeting. In all the, even though I don't know that he, didn't fill out our spreadsheet, and he didn't probably take the questions and go use them. And, he didn't do the traditional things that sometimes people do. But what he found was that I was still, what he valued in the relationship was more of the sounding board and the confidant, and like, hey, can you believe this is what they said? Can you believe one said this and one said that? And, it was just a chance for him to kind of reason things out and really thought partner. And the ironic thing was about that particular relationship, that engagement has long since ended. And he and I have not stopped talking. Because we both got so much out of those conversations. So, those are the relationships that I treasure, even if they don't necessarily, take the well-trodden path, right? But that's why all these engagements are customized.
Awesome.
And see, it looks like, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Jess, before we end, I think Jess wants a few highlights from your book.
Highlights from the book. Yeah, thank you. So the book is called Resilience. It's not about bouncing back. It is all about building individual and organizational resilience. So the differentiator, I would say, there's a million books out there by people who were run over by a truck or dealt with cancer or had, any number of horrible, life-changing, maybe not horrible even, but life-changing situations that can talk about resilience. What we wanted was a book that would teach you, give you real definitive tools on how to build resilience individually. And then the best part of the whole thing to me is that we can take that and you can use the exact same framework and the exact same set of tools to build a more resilient team or organization. And so to me, that was the impetus for writing the book, was when we found out that the 3 characteristics of resilient people and organizations are identical. What that meant is that we could teach the same framework and you can apply it to yourself or your team. And we actually have, I'm going to give you another plug. We actually have we've been doing a 2.5-day workshop around this, which has life-changing, massively impactful workshop that, it's just been an incredible experience to get to do this. But this year, as of this month, it has been completely redesigned and revamped for virtual delivery. So what we learned in 2020 was that we just absolutely cannot take our content that we did in the classroom and slap it on Zoom. It just does not work. And we have 1,000 examples of companies that did that I cringe when I see. But we have a completely redesigned for virtual. We've got a new virtual studio that I didn't get to pilot here. Well, it's been piloted, but I wanted to do it for this program actually, but the slides need to be redesigned for the virtual studio. But we're able to actually recreate the interaction of a really introspective workshop virtually. And it's proving to be really effective. So really excited about that, but it follows the book. So check out the book. And if it's something you're interested in, I would certainly be more than happy to have further conversation about building resilience as well. And that finds its way into coaching too.
Robert has a really great question. He says, I know that I don't do well with office politics. This is both a gut feel and identified from personality testing. How do I overcome this bias early on?
Man, that is the $64,000 question. You know, that's a really hard one. I think a lot of us don't do well with office politics, myself included, I will admit. What has helped me is to take myself off the dance floor and into the balcony. So this notion of like trying to observe from 50,000 feet and saying, all right, what's going on here? Like what is really motivating people to do things, and really just trying to understand the dynamics with yourself out of it, right? Just take yourself out of it and really try to play an org dynamics analysis role. I find that helps because it allows me to kind of disengage from it, so I don't feel like I'm hyperventilating and feeling like I have to play all the time in the politics. So, I would say kind of take a step up to the balcony, look down, and then figure out real strategically, like you're looking down at a chessboard, figure out what the best thing to do is. The problem with politics, and those of us that hate it, is that we think it's not important. So it's really easy to just push it aside and ignore it, when what we really need to be is intentional about how we manage it. I'll tell you this, there's a book I recommend on this too. There's a book called The Secret Handshake, and I actually have a stack of them here. So if that's something you want, send me a note and I'll actually send you a copy because I've got a bunch of extras. But The Secret Handshake is a great book on organizational politics. I won't say it's like the best bedtime beach reading, but it really is a good book on how to understand and kind of finagle your way through organizational politics. But that's just one of the sucky parts of corporate America.
Great. I don't have, he said Robert said, that is good advice. Thank you. And Tamara or Tamara, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I would like a copy of that book as well. So we'll follow up with all of you with a replay and all the information. So you'll have an opportunity to communicate with us that way too. Jennifer, any closing thoughts before we wrap it up? We're almost to the top of the hour.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If there's absolutely anything I said that piqued your interest or you'd like to talk further about or strategize around how you might implement, please feel free to reach out. Either one of us we can set up some time and would be happy to continue the conversation. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Everybody have a great day. And again, we'll be in touch with you probably within the day.
And if you're asking for a book in the chat, if you don't mind shooting us an email with your address, we will work. Oh, Tamara! Oh my God. It's Tamara though. That's the pronunciation because now I know the person. So glad to have you join us.
So I was right on the first try.
You were. I was not. No, now I get it. That's awesome. It's been fun following you on Facebook too.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. We'll wrap it up here. And again, if you need anything, reach out. The information, either email us or drop a quick chat in LinkedIn. However, you can reach out and we will make sure that we answer questions and make our availability for you. So have a great day and we'll catch you next time.